Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 1. Out to Sea. I had this story from one who had no business to tell it to me, or to any other. I may credit a bottle of old wine upon me for the beginning of it, and my own doubt during the days that followed for the rest of the unexpected story. When that friendly person discovered that he had told me so much, and that I was tempted to doubt things, he felt forced to prove himself by finding written data in the form of a stinky book, and not interesting papers of the British Colonial Office, to support many of the important parts of his strange story. I do not say the story is true, for I did not see it happen. But the fact that in the telling of it to you, I have taken names that aren't real for the main characters, shows that I believe that it may be true. The yellow, stinky pages of the private book of a man long dead, and the records of the Colonial Office come together with the story of that friendly man, and so I give you the story as I carefully put it together. If you do not find it believable, you will at least be as one with me in finding that it is interesting. From the records of the Colonial Office and from the dead man's private book, we learn that a certain young English man, who came from a high-class family, whom we shall call John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, was paid to make a study of conditions in a British West Coast African town, from which the simple locals were being paid to join the side of another European power, to use force to get rubber and ivory from other locals along the Congo and the Aruwimi. The locals in the British town said that many of their young men believed the large promises, but that few, if any, ever returned to their families. The Englishmen in Africa went even further, saying that these poor black-skinned people were held in slavery, since after their contract was over, their lack of knowledge was used by their white officers, and they were told that they had yet several years to serve. And so the Colonial Office appointed John Clayton to a new post in British West Africa, but his secret orders were to find out about the unjust treatment of black British subjects by the officers of a friendly European power. Why he was sent doesn't matter to this story, because he never did it, nor, in fact, did he ever reach the town. Clayton was the type of Englishman that one likes best to associate with the great statues of historic successes upon 1,000 winning fields where there were fights. A strong, energetic, and good man. He was above the average height, his eyes were gray, his features strong, his way of moving was great due to his years of army training. Political hopes had caused him to seek to move from the army to the Colonial Office, and so we find him, still young, given a job by the Queen. When he received this job, he was both happy and scared. The job seemed to him like money for a job well done for good service, and as a step to posts of greater value and responsibility. But, on the other hand, he had been married to the high-class Alice Rutherford for just 3 months, and it was the thought of taking this young, pretty girl into tropical Africa, with the risk to life and separation from people, that made him feel fear. For her sake, he would have turned down the job. But she would not have it so. Instead, she made it clear that he should accept and, indeed, take her with him. There were mothers and brothers and sisters and aunts and cousins to express various opinions on the subject. But as to what they said, history says nothing. We know only that on a bright May morning in 1888, John, Lord Greystoke, and Lady Alice went from Dover on their way to Africa. A month later, they arrived at Freetown, where they paid for a small sailing vessel, the Fuwalda, which was to carry them to where they were going. And here John, Lord Greystoke, and Lady Alice, his wife, no longer were known in the eyes and the knowledge of men. 2 months after they went from Freetown, a half-dozen British war vessels were searching the South Atlantic for them or the Fuwalda, and it was almost immediately that the wreckage was found at St. Helena, which showed the world that the Fuwalda had gone down with everyone who was on her. And so the search was stopped shortly after it had begun, though hope remained in some people for many years. The Fuwalda, a barkentine, was often seen trading in the far southern Atlantic. Barkentines often had people working on them who were the worst of every country. The Fuwalda was no different. Her officers were mean. The captain, while good at his job, was even meaner. He knew, or at least he used to know, but 2 ways to deal with his people: a belaying pin and a revolver. Nor is it likely his men would have understood anything else. So it was that from the second day after leaving Freetown, John Clayton and his young wife saw things they had believed only happened in stories. It was on the morning of the second day that the first link was made in what was to form a chain of events, ending in a life for one still inside his mother, such as no other man has ever had. 2 sailors were cleaning the floors of the Fuwalda. The captain's helper was working, and the captain had stopped to speak with John Clayton and Lady Alice. The men were working toward the little party, who were facing away from the sailors. Closer and closer they came until one of them was directly behind the captain. In another moment, he would have passed by, and this strange story would never have been recorded. But just that moment, the captain turned to leave Lord and Lady Greystoke, and, as he did so, tripped against the sailor and fell to the ship's floor head first, hitting the water pail, so that he got very wet and dirty. For an instant, it was silly, but only for a moment. With a lot of bad words, his face turning red with anger, the captain stood up and with his hand hit the sailor, which knocked him to the floor of the barkentine. The man was small and rather old, so that the meanness of the act was made worse. The other sailor, however, was neither old nor small, a huge bear of a man, with a strong black mustache, a great neck, and 2 huge arms. As he saw his friend go down, he got low, and, with a low growl, jumped upon the captain, hitting him over. From red the captain's face went white, for this was mutiny, and mutiny he had met and put an end to before. Without waiting to rise, he got out a revolver, firing it at the large man before him. But, quick as he was, John Clayton was almost as quick, so that the bullet, which was supposed to kill the sailor, went into the sailor's leg instead, for Lord Greystoke had hit the captain's arm down as he had seen the revolver in the sun. Words passed between Clayton and the captain, the former making it clear that the captain had made him angry. By the way he acted, Clayton would not let the captain do something like that again while he was there. The captain was about to make an angry reply, but, thinking better of it, turned away and, black and making an angry face, went to the back of the barkentine. He did not want to make one of the Queen's men angry, for he feared the Queen's navy. The 2 sailors picked themselves up, the older man helping his hurt friend to rise. The big guy, who was known among his friends as Black Michael, tried his leg carefully, and, finding that it kept him up, turned to Clayton with a word of thanks. Though the guy's voice was rude, he meant his words, it seemed. Before he had finished his little speech, he had turned and was walking painfully off toward where he slept, to stop any more conversation. He did not see him again for several days, nor did the captain give them more than the rudest of grunts, when he was forced to speak to them. They took their food in his room, as they had before the trouble, but the captain was sure to see that his job never allowed him to eat at the same time. The other officers were rude people who couldn't write, only a little above the wicked sailors they pushed around, and were only too happy to avoid talking with the polished Englishman and his lady, so that the Claytons were left very much to themselves. This in itself was what they wanted, but it also rather kept them from the life of the little ship, so that they were unable to keep in touch with the daily happenings, which were to end soon in blood. There was in the air of the ship the feeling of doom. To the knowledge of the Claytons, all went on as before upon the little ship, but both felt that there was a pull towards some danger that they couldn't see, though they did not speak of it to each other. On the second day after Black Michael was hurt, Clayton came on top of the ship just in time to see the limp body of one of the sailors being carried below by 4 others, while the first mate, a heavy belaying pin in his hand, looked angrily at the little party of sailors. Clayton asked no questions. He did not need to, and the following day, as the great lines of a British battleship grew closer, he half decided to demand that he and Lady Alice be put on her, for his fears were growing that nothing but hurt could result from remaining on the Fuwalda. Toward noon they were close enough to speak to the British ship, but when Clayton had nearly decided to ask the captain to put them aboard her, the obvious silliness of asking for that became suddenly obvious. What reason could he give the officer in charge of the Queen's ship for wanting to go back to where he had just come? What if he told them that 2 sailors had been hurt by their officers? They would but laugh in their sleeves, and think he was a coward. John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, did not ask to be moved to the British ship. Late in the afternoon the ship could no longer be seen over the ocean, but before that he learned that which let him know for sure that his greatest fear was true, and caused him to be angry at himself for not keeping his wife out of danger. It was the middle of the afternoon that brought the little old sailor, who had been hit by the captain a few days before, to where Clayton and his wife stood by the ship's side, watching the battleship grow smaller. The old guy was polishing brasses, and as he came close to Clayton, he whispered, "L's to pay, sir, on this 'ere ship, and mark my word for it, sir, L's to pay." "What do you mean, my good man?" asked Clayton. "Why's, hasn't you seen what's going on? Hasn't you heard that devil's spawn of a captain and his mate hitting the sailors? 2 hurt heads yesterday, and 3 today. Black Michael's as good as new again, and he's not the bully to stand for it, not he. And mark my word for it, sir." "You mean, my man, that the sailors are thinking about mutiny?" asked Clayton. "Mutiny!" exclaimed the old guy. "Mutiny! They means to kill, sir, and mark my word for it, sir." "When?" "It's comin', sir, it's comin', but I'm not a-sayin' when, and I've said too damned much now. But you was a good guy t'other day, and I thought it no more'n right to tell ye. But keep your mouth still in your head, and when you hear bullets git below and stay there. That's all, only keep a still tongue in your head, or they'll kill ye too, and mark my word for it, sir." And the old guy went on with his polishing, which carried him away from where the Claytons were standing. "Looks bad, Alice," said Clayton. "You should tell the captain at once, John. Possibly the trouble may yet be stopped," she said. "I suppose I should, but yet I want to keep a still tongue in my head. Whatever they do now, they will help us, because I helped this guy Black Michael. But should they find that I had talked, then there would be no help for us, Alice." "You have but one job, John, and that is what you should do. If you do not warn the captain, you are as much a party to whatever follows as though you had helped to do it with your own head and hands." "You do not understand, dear," replied Clayton. "It is of you I am thinking. There lies my first duty. The captain has brought this condition upon himself, so why, then, should I risk my wife to unthinkable dangers in a probably useless attempt to save him from his own mistake? You have no idea, sir, and what would follow were this group of murderers to gain control of the Fuwalda." "Duty is duty, John, and no amount of talk may change it. I would be a poor wife of an English lord were I to be the cause of his not doing his clear duty. I realize the danger which must follow, but I can face it with you." "Have it as you will, then, Alice," he answered, smiling. "Maybe we are borrowing trouble. And while I do not like the look of things on board this ship, they may not be so bad after all, for it is possible that the ancient mariner was but voicing his bad wants, rather than speaking of real facts. Mutiny on the high sea may have been common 100 years ago, but in this good year 1888 it is the least likely of happenings. But there goes the captain to his cabin now. If I am going to tell him, I might as well get the horrible job over, for I have little stomach to talk with the bully at all." So saying, he walked in the direction of the companionway, through which the captain had passed, and a moment later was knocking at his door. "Come in," growled the deep voice of that rude officer. And when Clayton entered, and closed the door behind him, "Well, I have come to report a conversation I heard today, because I feel that, while there may be nothing to it, it is as well that you be told. In short, the men are thinking about mutiny and murder." "It's a lie," roared the captain. "And if you have been getting in the way with the discipline of this ship, or getting involved in things that don't concern you, you can take the consequences and be damned. I don't care whether you are an English lord or not. I'm captain of this here ship, and from now on you keep your nose out of my business." The captain had worked himself up to such an anger that he was rather purple of face, and he shrieked the last words, hitting the table with one huge hand and showing the other to Clayton. Greystoke never turned a hair, but stood looking at the excited man. "Captain Billings," he said finally, "if you will pardon my candor, I might say that you are something of an ass." At which point he turned and left the captain with the same calm he usually had, and which would anger a man of Billings' class more than swearing at him. So although the captain might easily have been brought to wish he hadn't said what he'd said, if Clayton had attempted to say sorry, his anger was now set, and the last chance of their working together for their common good was gone. "Well, Alice," said Clayton, as he rejoined his wife, "I might have saved my breath. The fellow proved most unthankful, almost came at me like an angry dog. He and his damned old ship may die for all I care, and until we are off the thing, I shall spend my energies in looking after us. And I would rather the first step to that end should be to go to our cabin and look over my revolvers. I am sorry now that we put the larger guns and the ammunition with the stuff below." They found their cabin in bad shape, clothing from their open boxes and bags all over the little room, and even their beds had been thrown to pieces. "It seems someone was more worried about our belongings than we," said Clayton. "Let's have a look around, Alice, and see what's missing." A thorough search showed the fact that nothing had been taken but Clayton's 2 revolvers and the small supply of ammunition he had saved out for them. "Those are the very things I most wish they had not taken," said Clayton. "And the fact that they wished for them and them alone is most sinister." "What are we to do, John?" asked his wife. "Perhaps you are right in that our best chance lies in not choosing sides. If the officers are able to prevent a mutiny, we have nothing to fear, while if the mutineers are victorious, our one hope lies in not having attempted to stop or anger them." "Right you are, Alice. We'll keep in the middle of the road." As they started to straighten up their cabin, Clayton and his wife simultaneously noticed a piece of paper beneath the door of their room. As Clayton got down to reach for it, he was amazed to see it move further into the room, and then he realized that it was being pushed inward by someone from without. Quickly and silently, he stepped toward the door, but as he reached for the knob to throw it open, his wife's hand fell upon his wrist. "No, John," she whispered. "They do not wish to be seen, and so we should not see them. Do not forget that we are keeping to the middle of the road." Clayton smiled and dropped his hand to his side. Thus they stood watching the little bit of white paper until it finally remained at rest upon the floor, just inside the door. Then Clayton stooped and picked it up. It was a bit of dirty white paper folded into a square. Opening it, they found a message written almost illegibly, and with many evidences of a job not done very often. Translated, it said to the Claytons to not tell anyone about the loss of the revolvers, or what the old sailor had told them, on pain of death. "I rather imagine we'll be good," said Clayton with a rueful smile. "About all we can do is to sit tight and wait for whatever may come." Chapter 2. The Savage Home. Nor did they have long to wait for the next morning as Clayton was emerging on deck. For his accustomed walk before breakfast, a shot rang out, and then another, and another. The sight which met his eyes made him sure of his worst fears. Facing the little group of officers was the entire crew of the Fuwalda, and at their head stood Black Michael. At the first group of shots from the officers, the men ran for cover, and from points where they could see, they shot back at the 5 men, that is, the captain and his officers. 2 of their number had gone down before the captain's revolver. They lay where they had fallen between the people who were fighting. But then the first mate moved forward quickly, and, at a cry of order from Black Michael, the mutineers charged the remaining 4. The crew had been able to find but 6 guns, so most of them were armed with various tools used on a ship. The captain's revolver was out of bullets, and he was reloading as the charge was made. The second mate's gun wasn't working, and so there were but 2 weapons to stop the mutineers as they came at the officers, who now started to give back before the angry charge of their men. Both sides were cursing in a frightful way, which, together with the sound of the guns and the cries and the grunts of the hurt, turned the deck of the Fuwalda so it was similar to a madhouse. Before the officers had taken a dozen backward steps, the men were upon them. An axe in the hands of a big sailor with black skin cut the captain's head in half, and an instant later the others were down, dead, or hurt from dozens of hits and bullets. Short and terrible had been the work of the mutineers of the Fuwalda, and through it all John Clayton had stood carelessly next to the companionway, smoking his pipe as though he had been watching a cricket game. As the last officer went down, He thought it was time that he returned to his wife to stop any people in the crew from finding her alone below. Though outwardly calm and careless, Clayton was inwardly full of fear for his wife at the hands of these men into whose hands they'd been thrown. As he turned to go down the ladder, he was surprised to see his wife standing on the steps almost at his side. "How long have you been here, Alice?" "Since the beginning," she replied. "How terrible, John. Oh, how terrible. What can we hope for at the hands of such as those?" "Breakfast, I hope," he answered, smiling bravely, to try to stop her from being too full of fear. "At least," he added, "I'm going to ask them. Come with me, Alice. We must not let them think we expect any but nice treatment." The men had by this time surrounded the dead and hurt officers, and without the least niceness threw them over the sides of the vessel. With the same amount of not caring, they threw away their own dead and dying. Presently, one of the crew saw the approaching Claytons, and with a cry of, "Here's 2 more for the fishes," ran toward them with an axe. But Black Michael was even quicker, so that the fellow went down with a bullet in his back before he had taken a 6 steps. With a loud roar, Black Michael got the attention of the others, and, pointing to Lord and Lady Greystoke, cried, "These here are my friends, and they are to be left alone. D'ye understand? I'm captain of the ship now, and what I says goes," he added, turning to Clayton. "Just keep to yourselves, and nobody'll harm ye." And he looked threateningly on his fellows. The Claytons followed Black Michael's orders so well that they saw but little of the crew and knew nothing of the plans the men were making. Occasionally they heard faint sounds of fights among the mutineers, and 2 times the sound of guns rang out on the still air. But Black Michael was a good leader for this group of killers. On the 5th day following the murder of the ship's officers, land was sighted by a sailor. Black Michael told Clayton that if people could live there, then he and Lady Greystoke were to go there with their belongings. "You'll be all right there for a few months," he explained, "and by that time we'll have been able to make it to somewhere where no one lives. Then I'll see that your government's told where you be, and they'll soon send a man-o'-war to fetch ye off. It would be a hard matter to land you where people live without a lot of questions being asked, and none o' us here has any very good answers up our sleeves." Clayton said that he didn't like being put on unknown land with unknown animals, and possibly men who act like animals. But his words didn't help, and only made Black Michael angrier, so he was forced to stop and make the best of a bad situation. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon they came to a beautiful land with a lot of trees. Black Michael sent a small ship filled with men to sound the entrance, in an effort to determine if the Fuwalda could be worked through the entrance. In about an hour they returned and reported deep water. Before dark, the Berkentine lay at anchor. The land nearby was beautiful with trees and such, while far away the land went up from the ocean, covered in a forest. No signs of people could be seen, but that the land might easily support human life was shown by the many birds and animals of which the people on the Fuwalda's deck sometimes saw, as well as a little river which went into the ocean, so there was a lot of water to drink. As it got dark, Clayton and Lady Alice still stood on the ship looking at their future home without talking. From the dark of the mighty forest came the calls of wild animals, the deep roar of the lion, and, occasionally, the cries of a panther. The woman moved closer to the man in fear of what would become of them. alone upon that wild land. Later in the evening, Black Michael joined them long enough to tell them to make their preparations for landing on the morrow. They tried to get him to take them to some land near other people so that they might hope to fall into friendly hands, but nothing could move him. "I'm the only man aboard who would not rather see ye both dead, and while I know that's the sensible way to make sure of our own necks, yet Black Michael's not the man to forget a thing done for him. Ye saved my life once, and in return I'm gonna save yours, but that's all I can do. The men won't stand for any more, and if we don't get ye landed pretty quick, they may even change their minds about giving ye that much. I'll put all your stuff ashore with ye, as well as cooking utensils, and some cloth for tents, and enough grub to last ye until ye can find other food. With your guns for protection, ye ought to be able to live here easy enough until help comes. When I get somewhere safe, I'll see to it that the British government learns about where ye be. For the life of me, I couldn't tell 'em exactly where, for I don't know myself, but they'll find ye all right." After he had left them, they went silently below, each with bad thoughts. Clayton did not believe that Black Michael was going to tell the British government where they were, nor was he any too sure but that there were not bad plans for them the next day, when they should be on the shore with the sailors who would have to bring their belongings. Once where Black Michael couldn't see, the men might kill them, and still leave Black Michael without any bad memories of having killed them. And even should they not be killed, was it not but to be faced with far graver dangers? Alone, he might hope to live for years, for he was a strong man. But what of Alice, and that other little life, so soon to be put into a life in the wilds? The man shuddered as he thought about their situation, but it was Providence which kept him from knowing what would happen in that forest. Early next morning, their many boxes were put on deck and lowered to waiting small ships to go to shore. There was a lot of stuff, as the Claytons had expected to live possibly 5 to 8 years in their new home. Thus, in addition to many necessities they had brought, there were also many things they didn't need but made life nicer. Black Michael was determined that nothing the Claytons owned should be left on board. Whether to be nice to them, or because it helped himself, it would be difficult to say. There was no question but having belongings of a missing British official upon the vessel would be difficult to explain. So good was he in his efforts to carry out his plan that he made sure Clayton's revolvers were returned to him by the sailors who had them. Into the small ships were also loaded meat, other foods, things to make food with, and the old sails which Black Michael had promised them. As though himself fearing the very thing which Clayton had guessed, Black Michael went to shore with them, and was the last to leave them when the small ships, carrying new water that people could drink without dying, left toward the waiting Fuwalda. As the boats moved slowly over the water, Clayton and his wife stood silently, watching the ship leave with feelings of doom in their bodies. And behind them, over a low hill, other eyes watched, wicked eyes. As the Fuwalda left and they could no longer see it, Lady Alice threw her arms about Clayton's neck and cried. Bravely had she faced the dangers of the mutiny. With strength she had looked into the bad things which she felt sure would happen. But now that the fear of being alone was upon them, she gave up, and so she cried. He did not attempt to stop her tears. It was better that way, and it was many minutes before the girl, little more than a child she was, could again gain control of herself. "Oh, John," she cried at last, "the horror of it! What are we to do? What are we to do?" "There is but one thing to do, Alice," and he spoke as quietly as though they were sitting in their living room at home, "and that is to work. Work must be what saves us. We must not give ourselves time to think, for in that direction lies madness. We must work and wait. I am sure that someone will save us, and quickly, when once it is clear that the Fuwalda has been lost, even though Black Michael does not keep his word to us." "But, John, if it were only you and I," she cried. "We could take it, I know, but—" "Yes, dear," he answered gently. "I have been thinking of that also. But we must face it, as we must face whatever comes, bravely and with the confidence in our ability to deal with whatever they may be. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, our long-ago parents faced the same problems which we must face, possibly in these same wild forests. That we are here today shows that they succeeded. What they did may we not do, and even better, for do we not have more knowledge, and have we not the means of making food which science has given us, but of which they did not know? What they did, Alice, with tools made of stone instruments and weapons of stone and bone, surely that may we do also." "Ah, John, I wish that I might be a man with a man's philosophy, but I am but a woman, seeing with my heart rather than my head, and all that I can see is too horrible, too unthinkable to put into words. I only hope you are right, John. I will do my best to be a brave wild woman, a good wife for the wild man." Clayton's first thought was to make a place to sleep for the night, something which might serve to protect them from beasts that ate meat. He opened the box containing his guns and bullets, that they might both be armed, against possible attack while at work, and then together they sought a place for their first night's sleep. 100 yards from the shore was a little level place, free of trees. Here they decided to one day make a house. But for the time being they both thought it best to make a little floor in the tree, out of reach of the larger of the wild beasts in whose land they were. To this end Clayton chose 4 trees which formed a rectangle, about 8 feet square, and cutting long branches from other trees, he made a framework around them about 10 feet from the ground, using a rope to put together the ends of the branches and the trees, the same rope that Black Michael had given to them. Across this framework Clayton placed other smaller branches quite close together. To this he added huge leaves, of which a lot grew nearby, and over the leaves he laid a piece of cloth. 7 feet higher he used more leaves and cloth to serve as a roof, and from the sides of this he put the rest of the cloth for walls. When completed, he had a rather nice little nest, to which he carried their blankets and some of the lighter luggage. It was now late in the afternoon, and the rest of the day was used to make a ladder, which Lady Alice could use to get into her new home. All during the day, the forest about them had been filled with birds, which were colorful and dancing monkeys, who watched these new people and their nest-making with every mark of interest. Notwithstanding that, both Clayton and his wife watched carefully. They saw nothing of larger animals, though on 2 occasions they had seen the monkeys come screaming from the nearby hill, looking with fear behind them. Obviously, something had made them scared. Just before dusk, Clayton finished his ladder, and filling a great bowl with water from the nearby river, the two went up into their house. It was quite warm. Clayton had left the side cloths thrown back over the roof, and as they sat upon their blankets, Lady Alice, who looked carefully into the dark forest, suddenly reached out and got Clayton's arms. "John," she whispered, "look. What is it? A man?" As Clayton turned his eyes in the direction she indicated, he saw a great figure standing upright upon the hill. For a moment it stood as though listening, and then turned slowly and went into the dark of the jungle. "What is it, John?" "I do not know, Alice," he answered gravely. "It is too dark to see so far, and it may have been but a shadow." "No, John. If it was not a man, it was like a man. Oh, I am afraid." He held her in his arms, whispering words of bravery and love into her ears. Soon after, he lowered the cloth that made the walls, so that, except for a little opening toward the shore, they were entirely inside. As it was now pitch dark within their small home, they laid down upon their blankets to try to gain, through sleep, a short break. Clayton lay facing the opening at the front, a rifle and a pair of revolvers at hand. They had just closed their eyes when the fearful cry of a panther rang out from the forest behind them. Closer and closer it came until they could hear the great beast beneath them. For an hour or more they heard it moving around, but at last it went away across the shore, where Clayton could see it clearly in the moonlight, a great beast, the largest he had ever seen. During the long hours of darkness, they caught but little bits of sleep, for the night noises of a great forest filled with animals kept them scared. 100 times they were forced not to sleep by screams, or the sound of moving beneath them.